Well, good morning. I'm thrilled. You know, Palm Sunday is one of the most anticipatory events of the calendar year in church. Not because it's not the event; it's the moment you're kind of most excited about, because it leads up to the most central element of the Christian faith. In last week's sermon, we talked about not what is truth, but John challenged us to think in terms of who is truth. And so as we're going through the series, this week I'd planned to talk about how Jesus is the answer. But something Don said last week really kind of resonated with me. Asking the wrong question will get you the wrong answer. And so Pilate saying, what is truth, is the wrong question. And Don posited, maybe he should have asked, who is truth? That is the question to ask. And true to form, asking the wrong question often gets a wrong answer, an answer that just doesn't help. What is truth? And Pilate just seems to kind of struggle with that. And it's almost, it brings me back to the image of little kids in Sunday school, and they're not quite paying attention like they're supposed to be doing. Or in religion class, if you're in a faith-based education. And all of a sudden, you get put on the spot. The teacher goes, so, Susie? Deer in headlights moment. And she answers, Jesus? No, Susie, I'm sorry. Jesus did not hang a red scarf outside the window in Jericho. Tommy? Jesus? No, Tommy, I don't think Jesus is one of the 10 Commandments. As much as Jesus is the answer, a huge amount of our understanding of Jesus is what makes him the answer. Because you can claim the answer Jesus and have no understanding whether you're right or wrong. So inherently, who Jesus is and how we understand him makes it the right answer, because understood, Jesus really is all 10 commandments, isn't he? Sabbath, Jesus is rest. Keep the Sabbath. If we look to him, we see not only the example, but the fulfillment of every single commandment. So, Tommy's right, but at the same time, Tommy has no clue that he's right, does he? And I think so many times when we look at the story of Jesus at his Passion Week, we see a lot of answers that are either right or wrong, and a lot of the people speaking them don't really understand why. And so today we're going to look at that simple question, kind of in the context of these two events, the triumphal entry and the trial of Jesus. And so as we look at seeing Jesus, the central question that Passion Week revolves around, the narrative constantly comes back to and asks over and over and over again, is who is this man? Who is this person? And it's a question Jesus himself put to the disciples in the Synoptic Gospels. Matthew chapter 16, verse 13, Mark 8, verse 27, and then Luke 9, verse 18. He says, who do the people say that I am? Oh, you're Jesus. Yeah, but what does that mean? Jesus says. And they're like, oh, some say you're a prophet, some say you're Elijah, some say, and all kinds of weird, and then Jesus turns and he says, yeah, but who do you say that I am? And then we have this stunning confession by Peter where he says, well, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. He gets the right answer, but he understands why. And so as Jesus enters Jerusalem, we see the crowds crying out, Hosanna. And the crowd is actually composed of some very interesting people. So just real quick, as our understanding of Jesus grows, we tend to place ourselves along a bit of a continuum. There's people that have no idea who Jesus is until he arrives in Jerusalem. They are the ignorant. They have no clue. Jesus who? Oh, yeah, he's a prophet of Nazareth. Then you have the gossips. Oh, Jesus, I've heard he heals people. I heard he has powers. I heard he does things. Then you have a fan. Somebody's like, yeah, no, I've heard him teach. Powerful teaching. Then you have followers that say, you know what? It's not just hearing him. It's not just being drawn to him. I want to do what he says. But sometimes doing what he says is rather inconvenient and uncomfortable, and I'm not so sure I want to do that because that's asking a lot, Jesus. And somewhere in being a follower, there's the shift to being a committed follower, a disciple. And you say, yeah, I'm going to do it. I want to be formed by you. And as we mature, we become a servant, eventually a friend, as Jesus talks about at the foot washing, and then kind of end game, the fullness of discipleship, the light, that you become a life of Jesus. You become so Christ-formed that you are Christ-like. You are a little Christ, literally the word Christian. You become like him. I'm beeping. Anyway, so today we're going to look at two texts, Matthew chapter 21, and we're going to be looking also at the end of the trial text. So Matthew chapter 21, verses 1 through 11, I'm going to read it here. Now when they drew near to Jerusalem and came to Bethphage, to the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent his 2 disciples, saying to them, go into the village in front of you, and immediately you'll find a donkey tied and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you shall say, the Lord needs him, and he will send them at once. This took place to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet, saying, say to your daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a beast of burden. That's Zechariah 9, verse 9. So the disciples went, and they did as they directed, and they brought the donkey and the colt and put on them their cloaks, and he sat on them. And most of the crowd spread their cloaks on the road, and others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. And the crowd that went before him and the crowd following him were shouting, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna on high, which is quoting Psalm 118. And when he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred up, saying, who is this? And I love it, because it's not the disciples that answered, it's the crowd that answered. Oh, this is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth of Galilee. It remains astonishing to me, as Don has kind of picked up on the thread of it through the service already, of this shocking contrast between the truth and the lie, between the right and the wrong, between the light and the dark. And so immediately, as we're looking at this text, we see that the crowd, in their jubilation and excitement about who this Jesus is, it's mostly comprised of fans, gossips, and they address the ignorant. Because their picture of who is Jesus is that he is a prophet, he is a good man, he's helped speak for God, he's a religious figure. Their understanding of Jesus is not the understanding of Peter, who says in John 6:68, Jesus says, are you going to stop following me now because of this hard teaching? And Peter says, where else can we go? To whom else has the words of life? The recognition of the divinity of Jesus is on Peter's lips and on the hearts of the disciples. They would not have answered, this is the prophet Jesus. Not at all. And so here we see the collision of the inaccuracy and the hopeful expectation. Oh, it's Jesus, the prophet. No, that's not a full answer. That's not the right answer. And yet the circumstances, as much as the crowd says he's a prophet, the circumstances paint him as a king, as a Messiah. So let me trace that a little bit. Jesus rode in on a donkey. It was believed, it's a fulfillment of prophecy, Zechariah chapter 9, but the interesting thing is if a king rides into a city on a horse, horses were a function of what in the time of the Bible? War. Horses were wartime equipment. It's like the equivalent of riding in on a tank. Okay? If Jesus rode in on a horse, he's declaring that I am the military conquering king. I'm here for a fight. And yet Jesus rode in on a donkey. Now, at the time of in the ancient Near East, donkeys were the mounts of kings. They weren't war implements because they had a very stable gait. They could bear an immense amount of weight, and you didn't get distracted by the horse. You saw the king. And so the king would ride in times of peace on a donkey. So the donkey was a representation of a king coming in peace, a king coming in kindness. And so it's for Jesus to arrive in Jerusalem on a donkey would have declared loudly and obviously to everybody that he's not here for a fight. He's not looking for a showdown. He's come to bring peace and healing to the city. Interestingly, also, Jesus came, it says it came from the Mount of Olives, and he proceeded in, which means he came in the east gate. And according to all Jewish tradition, the king of peace, the Messiah, the anointed of David's line, would arrive through the east gate. And so Jesus' arrival declared clearly that he is the messianic king, the king of expectation and hope. And so the question, who is this? On the lips of the crowd, the prophet is not at. In the circumstances in which he arrives is the clear and obvious declaration of who Jesus is. And you know, there's another person that seemed to understand this. As Jesus arrives in the city, you have the Last Supper, the betrayal, and he gets dragged before them. And Jesus, as we talked last week, Jesus had this encounter with Pilate. And Pilate wrestled with this. And it's very interesting. Pilate came to this very odd conclusion that nobody else seemed to come to. He said, "This is your king." And the crowd said, at this point, no, he's a problem. So specifically, I'm going to point to John. And I want to encourage you this week, if you get a chance, read John chapter 18 and on. Just slow down and just process through John chapter 18 through to the end. As you go towards Easter, those words are just rich with the struggle of Pilate, the misunderstanding of the people, and the depth of truth about who Jesus is. Because on one hand, you have the voice, the words on the people's lips that is somehow always wrong, and yet the truth arrives from a different sector you never truly fully expected. Because even as Pilate has decided what to do with this Jesus figure, it says that Pilate, talking to him, it says he decided to do his best to release him after that. And so Pilate, at 3 times, says that he is the king of the Jews. And they cried out to him, what do we want me to do with this Jesus? And they said, away with him, crucify him. And Pilate said, almost like he's confused. You want me to crucify your king? Pilate came to the inescapable conclusion that Jesus, his encounter with Jesus, showed him that he was the legitimate king of the Jews, the king of Israel, the messianic king that he declared himself to be as he entered. And so Pilate repeatedly, over and over again, refers to Jesus as their king. And the crowd repeatedly, over and over again, say, he is no king of ours. In fact, the chief priest said, we have no king but Caesar. Gross misunderstanding. And the contrast is just painful. How is it that the Romans understood it? Who didn't know the scriptures, who didn't know the history, and yet the Jews who were steeped in it, grew up in it, had no clue at all. How could they miss this? And in fact, it's interesting because Don and I were kind of chatting about this, and he said, you know, their answer, crucify him, crucify him. Well, what, you want me to crucify your king? And it's the equivalent of the 5-year-old going, la, 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 I can't hear you, I'm not listening. And I think that's accurate, actually. Because when we ask the question, who is Jesus in this text, Pilate had figured it out. Jesus' encounter had won Pilate over, but Pilate could not help the crowd see the truth. So if you're at all in evangelism or apologetics, please don't make the mistake of trying to address a crowd. Crowds normally don't get it. It's one-on-one that you usually have the most effectiveness because you can talk about their thoughts and feelings and where they're at. You can address their understanding of who is Jesus. You can't address a crowd's understanding of Jesus. So Pilate writes on the cross. Ever notice when you see a picture of the crucifix at Easter, it's got those 4 letters over it? INRI. Who's ever wondered what that meant? Yeah. Anyway, so we'll do that real quick. Pilate wrote down in 3 languages, in Latin, Jesus Nazaraion Rex Judaion. Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Then he wrote the same thing in Hebrew and the same thing in Greek. So the INRI is the Latin abbreviations, or initials of the phrase. And the chief priest said, no, right? He claims to be the King of the Jews. And Pilate says, you may not get it, but I know who he is. And, the harrowing side of this is the picture of how the Romans genuinely treated who they knew Jesus to be. Jesus was Israel's king. And their picture of that is, great, let's spit on him. We'll put a crown of thorns on him. We'll beat him. Their view of Jesus politically was accurate. They were assaulting a king of a vanquished people. Their treatment of him was no different than their treatment of Israel 5 minutes later in the streets with their taxes and their oppression and their supposed Roman peace. There is no difference. Jesus was the expression, the Roman treatment of Jesus is an expression of the Roman view of Israel. Pilate alone stood different in that he met Jesus with grace. In fact, so it says, our last point, in Luke chapter 23, they were there and they began accusing him. We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar and saying that he himself is the king. And Pilate said, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus said, you've said it. Pilate said to the chief priests in the crowd, I find no fault in this man. But they were insistent, saying, he stirs up the people, teaching in all of Judea, from Galilee, even in this place. By the way, there's nothing to blame in that. Oh no, he stirs up people? He teaches them? Whoa, what are we going to do? In a sense, the Pharisees, in accusing Jesus, avoid any substance whatsoever. Their accusation is just, we just don't like him, okay? He's our problem. And so Pilate called them together, the priests, the rulers, and the people, and he said to them, you brought this man as one who is misleading the people. I know he's truth. And after examining him before you, behold, I do not find him guilty of any of the things you claim him to have done. Like, he's done nothing wrong. And neither did Herod, for he sent him back to me. Now look, nothing he's done deserves death. I will therefore punish him and release him. And they all cried out together. By the way, 16, 18. You notice there's a verse missing? So some manuscripts actually include a text that says it's their tradition to release one person a year. But it's not in every manuscript. And it's in all the other Gospels. But they cried out, away from this man and release to us Barabbas, a man who has been thrown into prison for an insurrection started in Jerusalem, and he was guilty of murder. Pilate addressed him one more time, the third time in this text. He's addressed him one more time, trying to release Jesus. And they kept shouting, crucify, crucify him. And the third time he said to them, why? What has he done? I find no guilt in him deserving death. 3 times. Luke chapter 23, verse 4, verse 15, and verse 22. I find no guilt in him. How we answer Jesus, the guilty, Jesus, the innocent, is a picture of our response to sin. Your perception of Jesus alters your response to sin. But they were all the more insistent. Again, no, crucify him. We're not, no, get rid of him. We want anything but Jesus. and their voice prevailed. And so Pilate decided that their demands should be granted. Like, what am I going to do? I'm going to have a riot on my hands. So he grants them their request. He released the man who'd been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, for whom they asked, and he delivered Jesus over to their will. Now, it's interesting because what most of us don't track is that they're both named Jesus. Jesus Barabbas, Jesus the Son of the Father, and Jesus the Son of the Father. Which Jesus are you following? Which Jesus do you want released? See, the crowd, as they went from ignorant to gossips, came to the critical decision when they're encountering the truth that Jesus is. Do I want this or not? And so Jesus became very much like them as he is for us today. Do you desire to love or to hate? If you desire to hate, Jesus is your answer. He's got enough substance to hate. You will hate him. If you want to love Jesus, there's enough substance there. Because I would argue that as you come to this critical moment of deciding whether or not to be his follower, whether or not you decide to be his disciple and grow in faith, we have to come to the recognition that Jesus is the answer to every faith desire we have. If faith is offensive to you, Jesus is the answer. I shall hate him. If faith is something that drives your life, Jesus is the answer. If you desire detachment from worldly possessions, like Buddhists do, Jesus is the answer. He sets you free from your lust of material. He fulfills every Jewish desire. He fulfills every Greek desire. He fulfills every Eastern desire and every Western desire. Jesus is truly the center of all desires that we can have. Where Pilate found him faultless, the crowd found him a criminal, because that's what they desired, an object of hatred or an object of adoration. And so the challenge for us today is when the crowd was calling out, "Give to us Jesus," which crowd are you part of? Because we all were part of the crowd of Hosanna. Here he comes. Here comes Jesus. Let's see what he's going to do. And at the end of the day, do we want to see our King victorious, or do we want to see him crucified? Do we want someone to hate? And so as we look at seeing Jesus, this week, I invite you to reread John chapter 18 and on. Encounter the Jesus who is the fulfillment of every desire, who is the truth that Pilate came to. He is the contrast of our humanity, and yet at the same time, he is a picture of grace. And as we move into that season of mourning on Friday and into the gift that he is, we're going to explore how Jesus being the answer to what the human condition is on Sunday, Easter Sunday, the day of resurrection. How is Jesus God's answer and gift to our condition? Because it begins and ends with grace. So, as always, go in grace.